I'd like to discuss today different ideas relating to the Sefirat HaOmer. Very interesting time period we're in. It's 50 days straight. We have a mitzvah. What is this mitzvah really all about? Should we be understanding about it? How should we be properly connecting to it? How does it connect to this time period that we're in between Pesach and Shavuot? What's today's approach to it? So let's start from the beginning. When the Jews left Egypt, so the day after they got out, they began counting 49 days. The culmination of those days was the 50th day, which became the holiday of Shavuot, when we received the Torah on R Sinai. Now, the interesting way to look at these days in between Pesach and Shavuot, the Ramban explains we can look at these days as like one big holiday, that from Pesach till Shavuot, just like we look at a regular holiday of, like, for example, Pesach has first day is a Yom Tov, the last day is a Yom Tov, and in the middle is Chol HaMoed. So here too, Pesach is like the first day of Yom Tov, Shavuot is like the last day of Yom Tov, and all of the days in the middle are like Chol HaMoed. Now, there's an interesting custom talked about in the Shulchan Aruch regarding Sefirat HaOmer. It's not widely practiced today, but it's worth mentioning because it does fit nicely with this way of looking at these days. There was, and maybe perhaps in some places still is, a custom for women. The poskim discussed that it's not necessarily only women, men could be included as well, not to do malachas during the evenings of Sefirat HaOmer. And this kind of connects with maybe like a Chol HaMoed feel, because on Chol HaMoed also, malachas, different types of works, are limited. So we see from a minhag that there was an idea of limiting all of the 50 days between Pesach and Shavuot, limiting the idea of malacha, which lends toward it being like a Chol HaMoed. The Rambam and others discuss the counting of the Omer. Rambam mentions it in his Sefer More Nevuchim, that really, and it connects very nicely to why we count specifically between these two holidays. He explains that really the purpose of going out of Egypt was only like step one. And it was ultimately in order to go to Har Sinai and receive the Torah there. That's ultimately what Hashem told Moshe before we even went to Egypt. That I want you to take the Jewish people out of Egypt in order that they could come and serve me on this mountain, which means to receive the Torah and all of the mitzvot through which we serve Hashem. So, in this perspective, we see these 50 days as days of anticipation, counting the days to this great Ma'amad Har Sinai, where we became a people, we became charged with a divine mission, and we received this divine Torah, which is lifting us up above even the level of the angels. We can also connect this with the offerings offered in connection with the counting of the Omer. The first offering was the second night of Pesach. They offered up a Korban Omer, which was made from barley. The rabbis point out that barley is really considered animal food. At the end of the counting, when we received the Torah on the Chag of Shavuot, we brought up Shnei Lechem, these two loaves of bread that were made of wheat. One of the only offerings that were allowed in the Beis HaMikdash from leavening that was allowed to rise was these two challahs that were brought, the Shnei Lechem. Now, one way to appreciate this build-up, and it really connects with the fundamental idea of what is really truly freedom. What does it mean to be free? Free is great, but free to do what? What is going to come out of someone that's given freedom? Is it going to be something positive or negative? That's the double-edged sword, so to speak, of really what true freedom represents. So if we just look at the step one of leaving Mitzrayim, so we were slaves in Egypt. They made us suffer. They gave us very hard treatment, and we became free. What now is the second step really will define what this freedom is all about. Freedom just to be on our own, if it doesn't include the idea of making ourselves better and climbing higher and following a life that has ultimate purpose, then what's the difference, free, not free, if your life has no self meaning and no intrinsic value? Then that's really more important than rather being free. Look at America, for example. If we look at America, we see with all the freedom that we can find there. So unfortunately, when we talk about Jewish values, in many cases the freedom results in behaving in a way that's absolutely contradictory with true Jewish values. Now these values predate the Torah. The Jewish people in Egypt lived a certain way, which gave them the name Jew. They were unique in their dress, their language, and their names, and their lifestyle. There was a way of living that the Jewish people had from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, a wholesome, moral, upright, honest way of living that was their namesake even before receiving the Torah. The Torah records many of these things and makes it mitzvot, but it existed before. So when we look at Jewish way of life and Jewish living, so America, for example, a place that offers us a lot of freedom, ultimately can be our worst enemy. It can bring us to behaving and acting in ways that are not the way we really should and truly want to be behaving. And so that's this double-edged sword of this freedom, so to speak. So the concept of becoming free of Pesach has to be linked directly to the Matan Torah aspect of it, which is the idea of connecting with Hashem, connecting with the divine communication and a divine mission. And that transcends this freedom into a spiritual journey where we really almost, so to speak, discover our true self. The Torah records the making of man. We define the making of man as in the divine image. It says, let us make man in the image of God. Now, this divine image is really what the essence of mankind is all about. Now, sometimes it gets covered up, and we don't really see it on the surface. But that's what's inside of us, is this divine spark, and it's through this divine spark that we really are trying to tap into. The freedom from Egypt and the receiving the Torah on Har Sinai, 50 days counting the Omer, is a spiritual journey, really getting back in touch with ourself and our neshama. And at Har Sinai, we're ready now to receive the Torah, which ultimately is a union and a fusion of body and soul. The Torah are physical things we must do with our body, but they're fundamentally and essentially spiritual things, because it's the ratzon of God, which by doing these mitzvot, it taps us into the spiritual realms above that were otherwise blocked off from us. Until we left Egypt and received the Torah, we were not empowered with this ability to tap into the spiritual realms of holiness and an ability to affect and permeate this world with that same holiness. So that's the real deep appreciation of this Sefirat HaOmer. We start off with this korban of barley, but at the end, when we stand at Har Sinai, we give this korban of bread, which is considered human food, because we've transcended. We've gone from the animal level of existing, this animal within us, we've tamed it, we've worked on it, we've worked up level by level, each attribute one by one, 49, and now we receive the Torah, which is even more power given to us. We are now charged as God's emissaries to represent Hashem in the world and to do His ratzon in the world. And that takes us really almost, we look at it from this perspective as a middle stage. This idea of going from barley to wheat, which represents the transition from the human animal to the human being, still does not consider the idea of with Torah and mitzvot and to ultimately bring out our divine spark within in its ultimate sense. That takes us even higher than the human beings and brings us even beyond the angels. The level of the Jewish neshama, the holy neshama that we have, when it's activated and actualized in the world, we transcend and go beyond even the level of the angels. That's why we're taught that the souls of Israel are actually carved out and come from one of the highest spiritual realms above. The kisei hakavod is what it's called, the olam habari'ah. And we even talk about in Kabbala and Chassidut, souls that are so holy and lofty that come from the divine realm of Atzilut. And this is ultimately what we're able to tap into and express and actualize in the world. The holy and divine beings that we were created to be in potential, but all that potential is locked up and unable to express itself until we experience this freedom. Freedom physically, freedom intellectually, emotionally, and ultimately the spiritual freedom that comes at the end through our divine service.